All right, welcome everybody to our first Cookwell Berkeley class of spring 2024. The theme today is Tasty Tofu. Thanks for bearing with us as we had to reschedule it a couple of times. This is a class that we did for the first time, I think sometime last year, to introduce people to tofu and the many different ways that you can prepare it. I tried to pick a couple of recipes that demonstrate its versatility. One is going to be prepared in the oven. So I'll show you how to get it nice and crisp, which is really important when you make tofu, depending on what the recipe is. And then another recipe where it doesn't need to be crisp. We're just adding it to a pot and you don't have to think too much about it. So really easy, beginner friendly. So the two recipes are on the board. I wrote the allergens. If you're online, they're in the document that's posted on BCal. So we have a Chinese corn soup. It's basically like an egg drop soup, but we're using tofu instead. So for people who don't like eggs, can't eat eggs, ran out of eggs, whatever reason, or you just want to try to incorporate more plants into your diet, we're going to make a soup with tofu. And then the other one is a tofu nugget that is made in the oven, and it's meant to be sort of like a similar flavor to a Southern fried chicken with all the different spices that we're going to use. And so the first thing that we're going to do is drain the tofu for the nuggets. So that's pretty much the first step anytime you make tofu, except we don't have to do that for the soup. So that makes it extra easy. But for the nuggets, we're going to coat them and bake them. So we want them to be kind of soft in the middle and have a crisp coating on the outside. So it's important to get rid of the extra moisture because that will prevent it from getting crisp if it's still wet on the outside, and it'll make it just a little bit too soggy on the inside. So for the nugget recipe, I'm using extra firm tofu. I would use firm or extra firm. There's actually no standard definition of soft, firm, medium firm, extra firm. It really depends on the brand. So you might have to experiment and find brands that you like. There's also super firm, or sometimes it's called high protein. That generally is going to be the most dense. It's like a really dense tofu that works well in certain recipes. So it just depends on what you're trying to make. The way that I like to drain tofu is just with 2 plates. I don't like to get too many towels involved because then I got to wash them or throw things away. So what I'm going to do is just place the tofu. This particular brand comes in these 2 separate containers, I guess, so you can only use half at once if you need. And I'm being a little rough with it because I'm going to tear it up anyway, so I don't really care if there's a little tear on the side. So I just take 2 plates and do that, and then weigh it down with something. So at home, I might use a cast iron skillet because that's something really heavy. I don't have a whole lot of heavy things here. Maybe we'll use this pot for now. And I'll add the bowl. Why not? Makes it a little extra heavy. So then you just want to let it sit for 10, 20, 30 minutes. You can even drain it overnight if you really want it to be, to get as much moisture out as possible. But as you go up from soft to firm, extra firm, there's going to be less water. It's basically a similar product that just has more water squeezed out of it. So the extra firm tofu it's not as tricky to drain. So if you want something that doesn't have a lot of extra moisture, then it helps to it makes it easier just to go for a firm or extra firm. Okay, so we're going to set that aside. Because we're coating it, I'm going to dab it with a towel before we cook it, if I can find a towel. And then that will help the outside stick. Okay, so we're going to let that sit, and we're going to start with the soup. Yes, please. It's like a hand towel, the fabric ones. Okay. So the soup is called Chinese corn soup. Again, it's similar to an egg drop soup, and the silken tofu has a similar texture to egg white, so it works really well. And what I like about this recipe is I often, thank you, have everything on hand to make this recipe at any time. So we're using corn that can be frozen. or in a can. So I always just have some of this laying around. And then we're using ginger and garlic, which I often have on hand. I personally really like the frozen garlic and ginger cubes at home. They come in like 20 in a little package, and you just pop out one cube, and each cube is a teaspoon or so. So it makes it really easy to throw together a quick recipe. We're also using green onions, which you can regrow at home. So in a pinch, you can have green onions. So what you do is you just cut off the bottom part and see it still has the roots attached. Put it in some water, like in a little glass or shot glass, and change the water every day until the roots grow. And then it will actually grow, this tall, but it'll be kind of wimpy, weak if you only grow it in water, but plant it in soil and you'll have green onions that just keep regrowing. So you can always have them on hand. And then the type of tofu that we're using for the soup is soft or silken tofu. And this kind of package is room temperature stable. So you could just keep this in your cupboard, and then everything else is just things in bottles and jars that you can keep on hand. So a nice recipe that you can make anytime. You can also use egg if you prefer, but since the theme is tofu, I wanted to show you how to use it. All right, so we're gonna cook this in the pot. This recipe makes about 3 servings. So if you're feeding a lot of people, you could easily double it. Or if you want to have leftover, this recipe keeps well, so you could make leftovers or eat leftovers the next day. Okay. So let's get everything ready. We need ginger and garlic. We're gonna saute this, and we need 1 green onion. So let's start with the green onion. I'll move this out of the way so you can see. Okay, the green onion, we're gonna use all parts of it, but first I'm gonna chop up the green part, and I like to sometimes, since this is gonna be garnish, I like to sometimes cut it on a little bit of a diagonal, just to make it look a little extra fancy. And then we're gonna save the white and light green part and saute that with everything else. You might not want to use the white part for garnish, just because it's a little bit of a stronger flavor, a little more firm, so it helps to cook it. Okay, so separate the different parts of the green onion, save that for later. And then the ginger, we want to peel it, and all you need is a spoon. So you don't have to mess around with anything sharp and scary that might cut you. So you just take the spoon, the skin is really thin. So you just use a spoon and scrape off the outside. And then we're gonna grate it. So hopefully see that on Zoom. And if you don't use the whole knob of ginger for a recipe, you can also freeze it. Okay. So I'm gonna just grate it with a little microplane. And we need just half a teaspoon. So on here, it kind of sticks to the back, so I'm just gonna scrape it off and measure it out. Okay, that's about half a teaspoon, that little extra bit right there. And let's also add our oil to the pan. I have the pan preheating over low, medium heat, because we're just gonna be cooking the aromatics here, so you don't want the heat really high because then it can burn. And especially burnt garlic does not taste very good. It turns bitter, so we don't want to burn it. I'm just gonna eyeball it about a tablespoon of oil. Oops. And then we're gonna get our last thing here. We just need the garlic, 1 clove of garlic. So you can kind of push down with the knife to peel off the paper. And then just mince it up. Okay. It doesn't need to be super fine. I'm gonna puree a little bit of the soup to give it a bit more of like a creamed corn texture. So I don't need it to be too finely minced. Let's turn that up a little bit. So we'll also add our ginger. And then the white and light green parts of the green onion. And then we're just gonna cook that until it's aromatic. And the recipe says to then, once you saute this for a second or a minute or two, then to add the green onion. You can do that. I kind of like to save it for the end for the garnish. So, you know, whatever your preference is. Okay, is this thing getting hot? This, I just have to have a disclaimer in this class. This stove is probably not as powerful as your home stove. So things might take a little bit longer to cook in here, but just know that it'll probably go a little faster when you cook it at home. Okay, now we can get everything else ready. So we're gonna add some corn. I like to just use frozen corn. One 10-ounce bag is about the right amount. It's about 1.5 cups, which is about the same amount that you're gonna get in can of corn. So you can use either one. You can also use creamed corn if you prefer, which contrary to the name, usually doesn't have dairy in it. It just means that some of the corn is like kind of broken up, or maybe there's something added to make it have a little bit more of a creamy texture. But we can also achieve that just with this kind of corn. And I'm going to use the immersion blender and just stick it in there for a few seconds to kind of break up the corn and thicken the texture of the soup a little bit. But if you don't have an immersion blender, you could just take some of the corn out and give it a rough chop really quick before you add it. Or you can take out some of the soup mixture once the broth is added and put it in a food processor or a blender. But to me, that kind of is a lot of extra cleaning to do. I like to just use the immersion blender, just stick it in there and then give it a quick wash after. Okay, so that's cooking. You can probably hear it sizzling. So I'm gonna turn the heat down. Definitely don't want to burn that. And then this is an optional ingredient, but I really like to add it. It's Shaoxing wine. This is made in China. It can be used as a drink, but this is cooking wine, which usually means there's salt added, so to discourage people from drinking it. I think it also helps you avoid alcohol taxes, but it does have alcohol. So if you completely avoid alcohol, you can just leave it out. Or if you can't find it, you can use rice vinegar or rice wine or mirin or sake. But it does help give this dish kind of that authentic Chinese flavor that you might find is kind of hard to replicate at home. So it lasts a long time. It's a cooking wine. I think I got this at Berkeley Bowl. You can also get it at 99 Ranch and lots of other markets. So I like to keep a bottle of it in the cupboard. So we're just gonna add 1 tablespoon. This one is a little sweet, not very sweet. So if you use something like the mirin, just know that it's gonna make the soup sweeter. And it's already gonna be a bit sweet with the corn. So maybe those flavors work well together, but if you don't want it to be too sweet, you could easily just omit it. So we're gonna put in there, and that's gonna help evaporate out some of the alcohol. Plus it's gonna continue to cook, and most of the alcohol is gonna cook out by the time this recipe is done. All right, so now let's add the corn. This thawed overnight, but when I make it at home, I usually just add it straight from the freezer. It's not a big deal. It's gonna be warm in a couple of minutes regardless. So don't worry about thawing it first. Now we can turn up the heat. And next we're gonna add the broth. So I can't really use the immersion blender when it's still solid like this. We need a little bit of liquid in there. So I'm gonna use my trusty bouillon broth. What is this called? Better Than Bouillon. My favorite one personally is this vegetarian no chicken broth. There is a vegetable one. I don't know how exactly it's different, but to me, this one tastes so much better. It really just tastes like chicken broth, but it's vegetarian for people who don't eat meat. And I know I talk about it all the time, so sorry if you've been to other classes and always hear me rave about this stuff, but 1 teaspoon plus 8 ounces of water is equivalent to a cup of broth. So there are 38 teaspoons in here. So this jar is equivalent to 38 cups of broth that you might buy in a can or in a quart. And it takes up so little room, and you just keep it in the fridge. It makes it really easy. So it is, they have various levels of sodium. This one is full strength. So I like to just add a little bit less. You can always add more salt or more bouillon paste later anyway. So it calls for 2.5 cups of broth. So I'm just gonna do, in theory, I should use 2.5 teaspoons of paste, but I'm just gonna do like 1.5 teaspoons, start with that, like 1 heaping teaspoon of the paste. And because there is some salt, I think, you know, the wine has salt added too, so you have to think about where all the salt is coming from, and we don't want it to be too salty from the get-go. Okay, and then we need 2.5 cups of water. There's 2 cups. And another 1/2 cup. And now we can turn up the heat all the way to get that going. And I'm gonna give it a stir. I'm gonna let it combine a little bit, and then I'm gonna stick the immersion blender in there to kind of break up the corn a little bit. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, we can do the next step, which is to make a slurry, which is a cornstarch and water mixture. You never want to add cornstarch to something hot, to a hot liquid, so it'll just clump up. So what you do is you mix the cornstarch with cold or room temperature water to kind of thin it out, and then you add it to the hot soup or whatever it is you're making and stir it. And then the process of heating and the process of stirring, it's heat and the mechanical action that are going to help disperse and create a thicker texture within your dish. So you want to be sure to stir too while you're adding cornstarch. So we need 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So yeah, this might look a little funny. I bought it in bulk at a Berkeley bowl. So it's in a bag, in a compostable bag. I usually bring my own jars. I think I just didn't have a jar with me when I bought this. But something else that I always like to talk about in these classes is buying things in bulk and how that can help you reduce the amount of plastic that you use and can save you a lot of money. I'm going to talk about that when we get to all the spices and herbs for the tofu nuggets. Okay, so 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and then it's going to be like a 2-to-1 ratio. It's a little hard to see this. Okay, and then a 1/4 cup of cold water. And since there are, well, let me do a pop quiz. How many tablespoons are in a 1/4 cup? 4. Yes, 4. So 2 tablespoons cornstarch, 1/4 cup of water, 2-to-1 ratio of water to cornstarch. So sometimes it helps to know these calculations. Like if what I did for this class is I doubled the recipes. So I knew I needed a 1/4 cup of cornstarch and 1/2 cup of water. So you could measure out, you know, 8 tablespoons or whatever, but it just makes cooking a little easier when you know all the cooking math. So another pop quiz question is, how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon? 3. Yes, 3. So then how many teaspoons are in a 1/4 cup? Oh, math quiz. 12? I think that's right, hopefully. Okay. So we have our slurry here, and we're going to set that aside. And the cornstarch is going to settle. So whenever you make a slurry, just make sure you give it a quick stir before you add it. All right. So the immersion blender, long cord. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start it on low. And I'm just going to turn it all the way up. I just hold it in place I don't want to totally puree it. And then that's pretty much it. So it's really easy. And then you just have to wash this little bottom part. The cornstarch, of course, is going to help it thicken as well, but I kind of like the texture of some of the corn being whole and some of it being broken up. If you don't care, then you don't have to, you can totally skip that step too. Okay, so we're going to bring that to a boil, which might take a minute. Meanwhile, we can work on the other recipe. So over here, we have our tofu that's been getting pressed. So I'm just gonna pour off, you can see a decent amount of water came off, even though it's extra firm tofu. I can give a little extra squeeze. And then I'm gonna dry off the outside with a towel because we want the spices to stick and for it to get nice and crisp. Put that aside. Just put that right there. Okay, so now, actually first we're gonna make a marinade for the tofu. Sometimes you marinate tofu for 5 minutes, sometimes recipes say an hour, sometimes it says overnight. Usually the longer the better, the more flavor. But for this recipe, we just want a little bit of flavor inside. There's really gonna be a lot on the outside, and we're gonna tear the tofu, which is gonna create a lot of like nooks and crannies and surface area for the spices to adhere to. So you don't really have to marinate it for a really long time for this recipe. So we need a little bit of oil just to help the outside crisp. And then we're gonna use some soy sauce or tamari to give it a savory flavor that's a little more complex than just salt alone, and hot sauce. So this recipe is meant to taste similar to like a Southern fried chicken. But if you don't like spicy, you can easily leave this out. There's also an intimidatingly long list of spices on the recipe. You don't have to use them all, especially the ones that are like a little pinch here and there. If you don't have it, feel free to leave it out. I usually add them all because I happen to have all these spices. So I do a lot of spice mixtures from scratch. But yeah, you definitely don't have to. So let me get the recipe. This recipe is from a blog called Vegan Richa. So all her recipes are vegan. She makes a lot of Indian food from her upbringing that she has made, or it's either plant-based or she's kind of changed it around to make it plant-based. She has a lot of really good recipes. I've used some of them in this class before. And I think she has a lot of really good tofu recipes. This is one of my favorite. I like to make this recipe if I already have a vegetable. Maybe I have like, I don't know, just broccoli in the fridge that I need to use up and I need something to go with it. And I'll just throw together tofu nuggets. Even if those two dishes don't make that much sense together, I don't know, they both taste good to me. You don't have to totally plan out your meals and make them fancy. They can be simple. Okay. So we need 1 teaspoon of soy sauce or tamari. I'm just gonna eyeball it. That's about all that's left in the bottle. Tamari is pretty much just soy sauce that is not made with any wheat. And I find that there's lower sodium versions. This one's 50% reduced sodium. And oftentimes the lower sodium soy sauce is only like 25%. So that there's just a little bit more options. Okay, a tablespoon of hot sauce. I used a lot less in the samples because I wasn't sure what everybody's spice tolerance was. Hopefully it wasn't too spicy. Was it spicy? No, not at all? Okay. So we'll just add a little more. And some oil. So you just want really any oil. Sometimes I go for more of a neutral flavored oil, but with this recipe, there's so many different flavors that probably doesn't matter too much. Or maybe you don't want something that's going to compete too much with the spices. So maybe you wouldn't want to use olive oil because that's one of the stronger flavored oils. Okay. So let's do the tofu and then we'll finish the soup. Okay. So like I said, we're actually going to tear it up to make little bite-sized nuggets. Maybe you can squeeze out a little more water. Sometimes there's a lot of extra water on the inside. We're going to tear it up into bite-sized pieces. And, you know, the bigger they are, the longer they're going to take to cook. So I like to go a little bit smaller, like a 1 inch in each direction. And that's going to help with the texture. And it's just kind of fun and easy. And that will create a nice crispy texture on the outside and will help absorb the marinade. So you can use this in other recipes too. I've seen this method used when tofu is used to replace chicken in a recipe. So it changes the appearance. You know, if you see cubes, not that you're trying to convince people that tofu is chicken, but cubes, maybe if you don't want the appearance of cubes in a dish, you can tear it up to make it look a little bit more like meat. Or if you want kind of that crispy texture on the outside, this helps. Okay, so I don't want to break it up too much. So I'm just going to try to lightly toss everything. And about 5 minutes should be enough that everything gets a little bit absorbed and you don't have a big pool of liquid at the bottom. If you end up with liquid at the bottom, make sure you're not dumping all the spices in because that's going to make it kind of a sludge. Make sure you're taking this stuff out and then putting it into your spices. Okay, so we'll let that sit for a few minutes. And the soup here has, I think, everything added except for the cornstarch and the garnish. Oh, actually, we're going to add a little bit of white pepper here. So white pepper is actually the same plant as black pepper. It's actually the same plant as red and green peppercorns. It's just processed a little bit differently. So with black peppercorns, the skin is left, or they're left out to dry and the skin shrivels up. If you ever look at a black peppercorn, it's really shriveled on the outside. With white peppercorns, the peppercorns are soaked and then the outside is removed. So it's a little bit of different flavor. I can't tell if it's hotter or not. Some websites said it is hotter, some said it's milder. I don't know, up to you, but it does have a little bit more of like a earthy, herbaceous flavor. And it's often used in Chinese and Vietnamese cooking. So if you want your food to taste a little bit more authentic, if you're making Chinese or Vietnamese food, then white peppercorn can help. Sometimes it's also used in a recipe where you just don't want the black flecks, like maybe, I don't know, mashed potatoes or something. But it does have a slightly different flavor too. Okay, so the white pepper is in there. And we have our cornstarch slurry. And I can tell that it's thicker on the bottom and kind of watery on top. So the cornstarch is starting to settle. It really starts to do that within just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to give it a stir. I can see it get a little bit milkier. And then I'm going to add that. And then again, I just want to make sure you're stirring. Once you add cornstarch to something hot, so you don't end up with big clumps. And you'll see it kind of thicken before your eyes. I don't know if you can see in here. I can tell it's already getting thicker. So this is, again, similar to an egg drop soup. With egg drop soup, usually you whisk up the eggs and then pour them in, and then you'll get kind of those ribbons. And then also the cornstarch is added to thicken. So kind of the eggs and the cornstarch help thicken the soup. So that's pretty much it for the soup. And then I like to garnish it with the green onion at the end and a little bit of toasted sesame oil. Maybe I'll put it in a bowl just so you can see how it looks when it's finished. And you can definitely add more vegetables to this too. Shiitake mushrooms would work well, or leafy greens. Or, you know, anything you like, you can get creative with it. There's all kinds of egg drop soup recipes out there with different ingredients. So I've made egg drop soup with tomato even, so whatever vegetables you like. A little bit of sesame oil at the end. Toasted sesame oil has a lot more flavor than regular sesame oil. It's a very strong flavor, so definitely don't add too much. It's also not as heat stable as like refined sesame oil, so often it's added more towards the end or to a dressing. And then we'll just put a little green onion on top. So I'll set that aside. So there's our super easy Chinese corn soup with tofu. And then we'll finish off with the nuggets. So this has been sitting here for a few minutes. It looks like there's not much marinade left at the bottom, but we'll start by getting together the spice mixture. And then we're gonna bake it. So I'm using silicone baking mat, which is reusable. Tofu is quite sticky, so you probably want to put something down in your pan, like parchment paper or one of these mats. I love these mats because you can use them over and over again. You can put them in the dishwasher, and so it kind of helps reduce waste a little bit. I'm also using a flat baking sheet, like a cookie sheet. When you want something to get crisp, it helps to use a baking sheet like this if you have one, because it allows for more air circulation. If you have a rimmed baking sheet, then that kind of traps some of the air and it doesn't circulate as well. So I like to use these when I'm roasting vegetables. I want them to get nice and brown, or for something like this where I want the outside to be crispy, almost as if it were fried. You could probably use an air fryer for this recipe too, if you want it to be crisp. I don't have an air fryer, maybe one day. But anyway, if you don't have an air fryer, then this works well too. This bowl is a little wet. Just dry that out. Okay. Oh, okay. I forgot to add the tofu to the soup. So that's an important step. It's okay. We can just add it later. So we'll just throw that back into the pot. This is silken tofu. Again, it's room temperature stable. And the silken tofu comes in different forms. This one is firm. I went for the firm because, you know, cooked eggs are pretty firm. But anything will work. And I'm just gonna use a knife to open it. And these kind of packages usually don't have a whole lot of liquid in them. So I can just pour that. Yeah, see, there's really nothing coming out. And even if there is a little liquid, it's just going into soup. So I'm not too worried about it. And since we want this to be kind of like eggs, what I'm going to do is just kind of break it up by hand. Just pull it out, give it a squeeze. And then if you don't break it up into small enough bits, you can, it's so soft that you can easily just break it up with a spoon. Okay, that's what it's supposed to look like. There we go. Okay. That's. And since we're not actually going to eat it, you know, you can eat tofu raw, especially silken tofu. There are recipes that are basically a silken tofu eaten cold with some stuff on top, like soy sauce and, you know, green onion, sesame seeds, whatever you want. And that's a perfectly fine way to eat tofu too. That's really quick and easy. So it doesn't require any cooking. So just again, for demonstration purposes, let's put some of that in the bowl. And we have more green onions, so we'll just pretend that didn't happen earlier. And there you go. Okay, back to the nuggets. Okay. So I'm going to use a big old bowl like this. If you happen to have one at home, it makes it easier because we're going to toss everything. If not, sometimes I just put it on a big plate so I can roll the tofu around. We're also going to use cornstarch for this recipe, which is a way to help get tofu crisp on the outside. It's pretty much the only way that I stir fry tofu now. I pretty much always coat it with some cornstarch before I stir fry it in the pan, because it gives it like a crust and a more crunchy texture on the outside. But the one caveat is it's not great left over. It gets kind of soggy. So the tofu nugget recipe is really best eaten fresh. You could eat it the next day. Maybe if you have access to it, you could pop it in the oven for a few minutes to try to keep it crisp on the outside. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll get to this step and then I'll mix up the spices and I'll cook only as much as I want to eat. I'll cook that first and keep everything separate. And then the next day, if I want more, then I'll mix it up and then cook it again. So you're not having to do all of this all over, especially if you're using a ton of spices and it'd be a lot of work to measure it out again. Again, you don't have to use all of these. Or if you really like the recipe, you could just mix up the spice mixture, like quadruple the spice recipe and keep it in a jar and just use as much as needed at once. Okay, so I'm gonna bring everything over. It's a good idea to get everything out ahead of time. Really, for any recipe, we were talking about this earlier, it's a concept called mise en place, everything in its place, the French term or phrase. So, read through your recipe first, get out all your equipment, get out all your ingredients, and then you can just throw it together. And meanwhile, nothing's burning on the stove or anything. Okay, so I added the cornstarch already, 1.5 or 2 tablespoons. I added about 1.5. And then if I'm getting towards the end of the batch, doing the coating and I'm running low, then I can add a little bit of cornstarch at the end. Okay. So we're gonna add first a tablespoon of nutritional yeast, which kind of gives it a cheesy flavor. If you don't have this, then you could leave it out, maybe just add a little extra of something else, like more cornstarch. You can also use breadcrumbs instead of cornstarch if you want more of a crunchy texture on the outside. Then we're gonna add a teaspoon of black pepper. It's a little hard to measure, so I'm just gonna eyeball it. And the black pepper, when it's freshly ground, is a bit stronger than, already ground black pepper. So maybe you don't want to add quite as much to start. You can always add more to taste. And then we're going to add a teaspoon of onion powder. Oops. My teaspoon has broth on it. Okay, here's another one. Okay, about a teaspoon of that. And then a teaspoon of smoked paprika, which I don't know if you can tell in the nuggets, they kind of had a red color to them. And that was mostly from the paprika and it's smoked. So it gives a little bit of a smoky flavor. So this is probably one I wouldn't recommend leaving out. You probably have that at home anyway, or at least regular paprika that's not smoked. And then we're going to add garlic powder. So I warned you that I was going to rave about buying spices in bulk. So here we go. This is garlic powder that I took the jar to Berkeley bowl. It was empty and they weigh it and then you go and fill it. You can bring a little funnel if you want, or they even have one you can borrow. And then you weigh it at the end and then you just pay for the weight of the whatever's in here, not for the weight of the jar. And when I filled it up, it was $1.15. So it's really cheap. I wish I had the receipt for the sage. So I bought some sage, dried sage, and especially herbs, they weigh like nothing. So this was probably pennies, honestly, like more sage than you could ever use in a year. I forgot the jar, so I put it in a bag. I don't recommend storing them in paper bags long-term because, they can absorb moisture. So you might want to transfer it to a jar. But anyway, it's a nice way to buy spices, especially if you only need a small amount and you don't want a giant container of something. Okay, half a teaspoon of salt. And then you could also just leave out the salt or add it later because remember we added hot sauce and tamari to the marinade. So those both contribute some sodium. And then half a teaspoon of ground sage. This sage is not ground, it's kind of still whole. So I'm just gonna break that up with my hands a little bit to help disperse it. But I think the dried herbs are a really nice touch in this recipe. It kind of gives it that like chickeny flavor, And then it says half a teaspoon of poultry seasoning, or you can just add more dried herbs. So about 1/8 of a teaspoon of, you could add a little extra sage. I kind of already added extra. Some dried thyme. and some dried rosemary. This is some rosemary that I dehydrated myself because I got a bunch of it for really, really cheap. So it's kind of still like in little needly things. So I'm just gonna break that up with my hands a little bit. And a 1/4 teaspoon of cumin, which is kind of a strong flavor. So that's why we're only adding a little bit. Here's another example where I bought it in bulk. I don't know how full it was. I'm sure I didn't fill it all the way up, but it was probably at least halfway and it was 45 cents. So pretty cool. Okay, and then the last ones are just a pinch. I think, things like fried chicken, there's a lot of different spices going on. So we're trying to mimic that. But yeah, if you don't have these, that's okay, you can add it out. That was a pinch of allspice, ground allspice. I'm just gonna give a quick little shake of nutmeg. Any chance I have to use up nutmeg, I take advantage because I bought this jar and you never use like a ton of nutmeg in any one recipe. And I don't use a lot of recipes that use nutmeg. So just always trying to get rid of it. A little bit of cinnamon. Okay. And then we can just stir that up with a measuring spoon. There we have our nice complex mixture of flavor. Tofu doesn't really have flavor, so it takes on whatever flavor you add. So that's a good reason to use up all these different spices to make it a little more interesting. And then again, I don't want to just dump this whole thing in there in case there's extra moisture at the bottom. So it'll make it kind of soggy. So I'm just going to add some of it and give it a quick toss. And I like to kind of like knock off some of the excess because if you end up with a lot of cornstarch on the outside, it doesn't really cook. By the time it's done, you have like this white coating and it's not a bad flavor, but it's not great either. So you don't want the coating to be too thick. And then I just spread everything out because that will help get it crisp on the outside. Because again, it's about the airflow. The toss. And it's okay if not every single side is completely coated. Okay, that looks pretty good. The red of the paprika really comes out once you add the tofu, once you add the moisture from it. And then you just bake this at 400 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes. You can do a little longer if you want. Just check it, and when it gets to the right texture for you, then it's good. Let's set that aside. We'll also our Zoom viewers how we have it on the baking sheet. Then you just bake that. So we have just a couple minutes left. There are a lot of things I want to talk about. So I'll see how much of it I can get through, but I just kind of want to give a quick overview on tofu in general. A lot of people say, oh, I don't like tofu, or it sounds weird, or I don't know how to prepare it. But tofu has been around forever, at least 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years. It likely originated in China. The first written record was around the year 950 AD, but may have existed up to 1,000 years earlier. Made it to Japan around the year 1100. And it's an important soy food in many parts of Asia, not only China and Japan, but Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong. To give you a little more modern context, in Japan, on average, adults eat 1 to 2 servings of soy foods a day, with about half of that being tofu. And it got established, or it became more popular in the US in the mid 19th century. Tofu shops were established in large cities that had large Asian populations, and then kind of became more popular through the 1900s. And then in the 1970s, it started to appear in all kinds of communities. What is it? It's liquid that's expressed from soybeans, and then there's a coagulant added, and then it forms curds, and it's drained and pressed into blocks. And then that's how you get the different types of, soft to extra firm or super firm. It's kind of a similar process to making cheese, honestly. Cheese, they add enzymes, it curdles, and then you can make different types of cheese from there. And it has protein and fiber and other nutrients, and they all get more concentrated the firmer the tofu is. So for example, in 3 ounces of silken tofu, there's 4 grams of protein. And that same weight of extra firm tofu, there's 10 grams. So 2.5 times as much protein, just to give you an idea. It has calcium, usually from the coagulant. So it depends on the type of coagulant used, but there's about as much calcium per serving as cow's milk, and it's well absorbed. There's iron that's well absorbed, essential omega-3s in the form of ALA. And some brands also fortify with B12, vitamin D, and omega-3s, the DHA and EPA from plant sources, which are usually only found in fish and seafood. There are isoflavones. So if you've heard about like soy and estrogen, that's basically what we're talking about. It's a plant estrogen, but it's very different from human estrogen, and is likely beneficial for a lot of people. So in postmenopausal women, it appears to offer similar benefits as estrogen in reducing hot flashes and may also help reduce skin wrinkling. And it may be protective against breast cancer. In China and Japan, women with the highest intakes of soy are less likely to develop breast cancer. And in the US, in studies done in the US and China, women with breast cancer who consume soy regularly are less likely to have a recurrence from breast cancer or to die from it. And in Asia, men with the highest intakes of soy are about half as likely to develop prostate cancer as people who rarely eat soy. So just a quick overview of some of the potential health benefits of it. I also want to talk about all the ways that you can prepare tofu. I showed you only 2 ideas today. We have a ton of recipes on our website. You can pan fry it. Again, I like to use the cornstarch on the outside. And we have recipes on our website, like, what is there? Ginger sesame tofu and just basic stir fry. You can bake it, you can cube it, crumble it, pair it. We have all those kinds on our website. You can cook it in liquid, like braising it. We have a braised tofu recipe on our page. You can puree it into desserts, like a chocolate pudding. We puree it into a ricotta in a couple of recipes on our website. That's actually really tasty. You can grill it, you can eat it raw, and you can scramble it like eggs. So check out all our other recipes. So we're gonna do our raffle.